She wasn't supposed to survive that cliff. That's what he counted on. That's what Luca Morty, standing at the edge in a perfectly fitted charcoal suit, not a hair out of place, postured like a man at a board meeting, had calculated down to the second. The storm, the dark, the 200 feet of open air between the ledge and the water below. He'd thought of everything, everything except him. She was 8 months pregnant. 8 months. Isabella Morty, barefoot on wet rock, her cream coat whipping in the wind, arms reaching for something, anything, as her feet left solid ground. Her dark hair pulling toward the sky. Her mouth open. You could see the scream even if you couldn't hear it over the thunder. And honestly, that image alone should tell you everything you need to know about the kind of man Luca Morty really was, because he didn't flinch. He stood there, hands loose at his sides, watching like he'd just closed a deal he'd been waiting on for months. And then, and this is the part nobody saw coming, a figure in a black coat launched off that same cliff. Silver hair, sharp jaw, zero hesitation. Rafael De Luca didn't call out, didn't reach from safety, didn't wait. He jumped. Arms finding Isabella midair, coat spreading behind him like a dark wing against the lightning-split sky, holding her like the ocean 200 feet below didn't get a vote. Who does that? Who sees a woman falling off a cliff and decides, yeah, I'm going too? We'll get to that. Because Raphael's reasons for being on that cliff in the first place are significantly more complicated than they look. Behind them both, still standing on that rocky ledge like a man who had just concluded a business meeting, Luca straightened his cufflink. His cufflink. Beside him, arms crossed, red dress barely moving in the gale, was Serena Caruso, watching the whole thing with this slight, almost bored expression, like she'd already seen the ending and found it satisfactory. These two people, composed, impeccably dressed, not a single visible emotion between them, had just thrown a pregnant woman off a cliff. And they were fine. That should scare you. It really should. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something about Isabella Morty, because this is not just a story about a woman who was betrayed. That's too simple, too clean. This is a story about a woman who trusted everything she'd been given, the penthouse, the marriage, the man who said you are the whole point of everything and said it like he meant every syllable. She believed it completely. And that belief, that one blind, beautiful, devastating flaw, was exactly what Luca used to build the trap around her. She didn't stumble into danger. She was walked into it, slowly, deliberately, by the one person she never thought to question. But here's the thing about that ocean. It didn't finish it. When Raphael pulled Isabella's barely conscious body onto those rocks, soaked and shaking, her baby still alive inside her, Luca Morty's perfect calculated plan started coming apart at the seams. Because the one variable he never accounted for was Raphael. And who Raphael actually is, why he was really on that cliff, what he's been building inside Luca's network for 13 months, that is going to change everything you think this story is about. We're just getting started. And if you think you already know who the real villain is, you don't. Raphael didn't jump off that cliff to be a hero. He jumped because Isabella Morty was the only person still alive who could bring the entire operation down. And here is the part that flips the whole story on its head. The woman in the red dress, the one standing with her arms crossed and that cold, almost smile while a pregnant woman fell. She didn't build this empire with Luca. She built it before him. He was just the face she needed. And she managed him the exact same way he managed Isabella. She just did it longer. You've already watched a pregnant woman get thrown off a cliff. The least you can do is stay and watch her win. The penthouse sat 42 floors above the city, and Isabella Romano had never once taken it for granted. She'd told herself that every morning, standing at those floor-to-ceiling windows with coffee going warm in her hands, watching the skyline do its slow color shift from gray to gold. She knew how lucky she was. Luca made sure she knew, not in a heavy way, not in the way that made you feel like you owed someone something. In the way where you just felt held, consistently, quietly, like the ground beneath you had decided to be reliable and meant it. He'd had the nursery designed before she'd even finished her first trimester. Warm cream walls, soft wood furniture, a mural of a night sky hand-painted by an artist he'd flown in from Florence because he remembered. He actually remembered that she'd once mentioned loving the stars over her grandmother's house when she was small. She'd stood in the doorway of that nursery and cried, and he'd held her from behind with his chin on her shoulder and said absolutely nothing, which was exactly right. He was good at exactly right. The lunches were a thing people who knew them talked about. His office was across the city, 40 minutes in traffic, and still he'd show up at hers 2, sometimes 3 times a week, with the specific thing she'd mentioned wanting in passing. Not a grand gesture, just attention. The particular kind that says I was listening even when you thought you were just talking. She'd introduced him once to a colleague as the most present person she'd ever met, and Luca had smiled and said, "She makes it easy," and she'd believed that completely. Had loved him harder for it. There was a dinner late October, one of those long candle-lit evenings that stretched past midnight without anyone noticing. His hand in hers on top of the table, which he did always, publicly, unself-consciously, like holding her hand was just where his hand lived. He'd looked at her across the flickering light and said, "You are the whole point of everything, Isabella." And she'd laughed a little because it was a lot as a sentence, a lot to carry. But she'd felt the truth of it, or what she took for truth, sitting warm in her chest for days afterward. That was the thing about a trap built this carefully. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a life. It felt like the exact life she'd quietly, almost superstitiously hoped for without ever saying out loud. And because it felt earned, because she'd watched him choose her small and large every single day, the thought of questioning any of it never fully formed. Why would it? What evidence did she have except everything she'd been given? The evidence she didn't have was locked behind a false panel in his study, but that part comes later. That part comes after the nursery, after the dinners, after 42 floors of believing completely. She had to have all of it first before any of it could be taken. She wasn't even supposed to be in his study. That's the part she kept coming back to later, the sheer smallness of the reason she was there at all. Her passport. She needed it for a form the hospital required, standard 3rd trimester paperwork, and she'd been almost certain she'd left it in the drawer of his desk the last time they'd traveled. Luca was at a dinner across the city. She was nesting, or whatever word you wanted to use for that specific late pregnancy restlessness that makes you reorganize things that don't need reorganizing just to feel like you're doing something. The drawer wasn't locked. That was the first thing. She'd assumed it would be, had already been composing a text to ask him where he kept the spare key, but it opened on the first pull, smooth and easy, like it had no reason to keep anything from her. Her passport wasn't there. But something else was. A slim matte drive, no label, sitting at the back of the drawer like it had always been there, like it belonged. She almost closed the drawer. She wants to be honest about that. She almost just pushed it shut and went to check the bedroom. But there was something about the blankness of it, the deliberate nothing of it, that made her hand stop. She plugged it in at his desk, sat down in his chair, watched the files load. The wire transfers came first. Hundreds of them, threaded through company names she didn't recognize, account numbers that looped back on themselves through jurisdictions she had to look up. Then the photographs, people she knew or thought she knew. A man she'd spoken to for 20 minutes at a charity gala in the spring, annotated in neat type along the margin. Asset managed. A woman she'd had lunch with twice, introduced by Luca as an old colleague. Informant compromised. Others marked simply, threat contained. People with faces she recognized from dinner tables, from fundraisers, from the warm, ambient social life Luca had built around them like wallpaper. Then a folder, labeled S. She opened it, and there she was. Photographs of herself she hadn't known were being taken. In the lobby of a hotel, at a restaurant, stepping out of a car. Always slightly angled, always from a distance, like surveillance, like documentation. And at the bottom of the folder, a document. 2 pages. Her full name at the top, which was when she noticed her hands for the first time, noticed them specifically because they were completely still. Not a tremor. Not even tension in the fingers. Just her hands resting on the desk steady while she read the words eliminate before delivery printed at the bottom of the second page like a line item, like a logistical note. Like she was a problem someone had already solved on paper and just hadn't gotten around to finishing yet. She read it twice. Then she sat for 4 full seconds in absolute silence. Then she stood up, walked to the bathroom and threw up. He came home at the usual time. She heard the elevator, the specific sound of his key, and she was in the kitchen when he walked in, standing at the counter with a glass of water she hadn't drunk, and she thought very clearly, don't look like anything. Just be in the kitchen. Just be a person standing in a kitchen. He paused in the doorway. That half-second of stillness she'd always attributed to him being thoughtful, present, reading the room because he loved her. She understood it differently now. It was an assessment. It had always been an assessment. You look tired, he said, setting down his jacket. Just tired, she said back. He crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead, and she let him, and her hand stayed still at her sides, and that was the last normal conversation they had. She should have run. She knows that. She has said it plainly, without self-pity, because self-pity isn't the point. She should have grabbed her phone the moment she heard the elevator and called someone, anyone, and walked out of that penthouse and never come back. But shock doesn't work that way. Shock doesn't make you strategic. It makes you wait for the moment that explains everything, the context that reframes what you read into something survivable. It makes you look at the man who kissed your forehead and think, maybe I misread it. Maybe there's something I don't understand yet. Maybe the word eliminate means something different in a context I don't have access to. She spent 2 days in that maybe. 2 days of watching him and loving him anyway, which is the part that's almost unbearable to say out loud. Even with that document sitting behind her eyes every time she looked at him. Even with the word delivery printed clean at the bottom of the page. She still made coffee the way he liked it. Still laughed at something he said on the second evening. Still reached for his hand once automatically and then caught herself and turned it into reaching for her water glass instead. He suggested the coastal drive on the third morning. Said he needed air, wanted to watch the storm come in from the headland, the way they used to before she got too far along to be comfortable in the car for long stretches. She went. She went because she still loved him. That is the whole reason, and it is enough of a reason, and it does not require any further explanation. The wind at the cliff edge was violent, the kind that gets inside your coat and doesn't leave. She remembers the sound of it more than anything, that low continuous roar, and Luca turning to her with his eyes doing something she had never seen in them before. Something flat, something already finished. I'm sorry, he said. It has to be this way. He wasn't sorry, not even slightly. But he said it, which told her everything about the kind of man he had always been. Then he let go. The ocean came up fast. The ocean hit like concrete. That's the only way she ever described it, and it's accurate enough that nobody who's heard it has tried to offer a better word. Not water, not cold, concrete. One full body impact that emptied her completely, air from her lungs, sound from her ears, all of it gone at once, and then she was under and the dark was absolute. She fought. That part matters. Even with the coat dragging her down and the current pulling from directions she couldn't name and her lungs already screaming, she fought, arms clawing upward, one hand pressed flat against her stomach like sheer will could be enough. It wasn't going to be enough. She knew that somewhere below the fighting in the part of her brain that was still cold and clear. The surface wasn't getting closer. Something grabbed her wrist. A grip like iron, like a decision, like someone had looked at the ocean and determined it didn't get a vote. He'd had to dive deeper than he planned because she'd sunk fast, faster than he'd calculated, and he came up from below her and his hand closed around her arm and he pulled, and they broke the surface into something that was barely better. Waves the height of walls. Lightning so close she felt it in her back teeth. The rain coming sideways. Her head kept falling. She couldn't stop it. Every time a wave hit she just took it, and he was the only reason her face came back up, one arm locked around her, navigating by feel through water that wanted very badly to finish what the cliff had started. 20 minutes. That's how long it took to reach the rocks. She has no memory of most of it. What she has are fragments. His voice close to her ear saying, "Stay with me." The particular quality of his grip which never loosened, not once, not even when a wave hit them both hard enough to knock the air out of him. She heard it, that involuntary exhale, and he still didn't let go. The cave was small and smelled like salt and cold stone, and it was the most shelter she had ever been grateful for. He got her down against the wall and draped his jacket over her shoulders and crouched in front of her and said, "You need to stay awake. Talk to me," and she looked at him for the first time. Really looked. Sharp jaw. Silver hair flat against his face. Eyes that were completely steady in a way that made no sense given where they were and what had just happened. She could hear the helicopter before she saw the light. He heard it too, went absolutely still and said, "Don't move, don't make a sound," and she pressed herself against the rock and held her breath while the beam swept across the cave entrance, just the edge of it, and moved on. When it was gone, she said, "Who are you?" He said his name. Raphael. "That's not what I asked." Something shifted in his face, just slightly, just enough. "Get warm first," he said. "We'll talk." The car was a gray sedan, unremarkable in every deliberate way, parked exactly where he said it would be. He'd made one call at dawn from a waterproof phone she hadn't known he was carrying, 3 sentences in a language she didn't recognize, and that was it. She didn't ask who he'd called. She was learning already that with Raphael the answers came in a specific order he'd decided on, and pushing against that order didn't accelerate anything. The safe house sat at the end of a dirt road behind a tree line thick enough to swallow it completely. Inside, a cot, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a wall of locked cabinets, and a laptop already running. No pictures, no personal touches, the specific blankness of a space designed to be forgotten. She sat on the cot. He moved around the room, checking things she couldn't identify, pulling supplies from cabinets with the efficiency of someone who'd done exactly this before. She watched him and waited because she understood by now that this was how it worked. "You knew," she said, "before the cliff, you knew this was going to happen." He stopped, turned to face her, and the steadiness she'd been watching since the cave, that total controlled calm, cracked, just slightly, just enough to be visible. "Not exactly," he said. "Then what exactly?" He pulled the chair out and sat down facing her, forearms on his knees, and he looked at her for a long moment like he was making a decision. Then he made it. 13 months undercover inside Luca's network. Assigned to track the money, map the structure, build a case from the inside out. He'd worked his way up slowly, methodically, from a logistics contact on the outer edge to someone Luca kept close, trusted with things, which was how he'd learned about her. About the shell companies. 3 of them holding companies with her name on the paperwork, put there 2 years ago because Luca had believed that controlling her meant controlling the documentation. What he hadn't accounted for was what that paperwork actually meant legally. She was the only person who could authorize an audit, the only person whose signature could pull the thread that unraveled everything he'd built. "He married me," she said slowly, "to use me as a legal shield." Raphael didn't answer. He didn't have to. She looked at the floor for a moment, then, "How long did you know about the termination order?" 3 weeks. Her head came up. "I was building toward extraction," he said, trying to time it without tipping him off. "I didn't." He stopped. Something tightened in his jaw. "I didn't move fast enough." The room was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the tree line. "Does it bother you?" she asked. The pause was long enough that she looked up at him directly. "Yes," he said, "just that." No qualification, no explanation wrapped around it to soften the edges. Just the word, sitting there undecorated, and she believed him. She didn't entirely know why, but she did. He started on day 4, which was earlier than she thought was reasonable and later than he thought was safe. She pushed back immediately and with conviction. She was 8 months pregnant. She said it with both hands, gesturing at herself like the evidence was self-explanatory, which it was. He looked at her, completely unintimidated by the gesture, and said he wasn't teaching her to fight. He was teaching her to not get caught. Different thing entirely. It turned out to be the most useful thing anyone had ever taught her. He started with exits. Every space, every time, before anything else. "Where do you go if I go down?" He'd ask it in the safe house, in the tree line, on the stretch of road they walked after. Dark when the air was cold enough to think clearly. She stopped finding the question dramatic by the 3rd day. She just answered it. Drainage ditch, then north through the trees to the logging road. 3.5 minutes the way I'm moving right now. He said she could do 3.5. She did 3.5. She stopped being surprised by what her body was capable of when the alternative was worse. Then sound. This one she hadn't expected to find interesting, and she found it completely fascinating. The difference between a helicopter running a straight search pattern and one that was circling, which meant it had found something worth circling. How a car engine sounds different on gravel versus packed dirt. The specific rhythm of a person moving through brush who is trying not to sound like a person, which is its own distinct sound entirely, nothing like an animal, once you know what to listen for. She started noticing things she'd spent her whole life filtering out. The world got louder in a way that felt like information. He was good at this, patient without being soft about it. When she got something wrong, he said so plainly and they went again. When she got something right, he moved on, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The mugs were his idea, though she didn't realize it was intentional at first. Every time she went quiet and still in that particular way, the way that meant she was back in the penthouse replaying something with the real subtitles running, he'd put something in her hands. Something warm, something to hold, a map he needed her to look at. It worked, which annoyed her slightly and helped her significantly. The laugh happened on the 6th evening. She'd asked how he knew all of this, where someone learned to survive being thrown off a cliff, and he said that part was more improvised, said it completely unbothered, and something about the combination of the delivery and the understatement and the 6 days of accumulated impossible circumstances hit her all at once. The laugh came out full and sudden, startling them both. The room felt different after, like something had shifted half an inch, just enough to change the angle of everything. She didn't have a name for it yet. She filed it anyway. The firewall broke on day 7 at 2 a.m. and Raphael went completely still. Not the focused stillness she'd gotten used to, the kind that meant he was working. This was different. This was the stillness of someone reading something that was rearranging the furniture inside a conclusion they'd thought was finished. She was on the cot with her notebook, writing down every account name she could remember from Luca's drive, every shell company, every detail that might connect to something Raphael could use. She'd been doing it for 2 days. Her handwriting had gotten smaller and more precise as the pages filled, which she noticed without knowing what it meant about her. She looked up. What? He didn't answer. She crossed to the table and he turned the laptop toward her without a word. She read, scrolled, read more. Then she sat back and said, oh. Because here was the thing about Luca's syndicate that nobody had understood, not the investigators who'd been circling it for years, not the people inside it, possibly not even Luca himself in any complete way. He hadn't been running it. The financial architecture, the long strategic moves, the decisions that looked like instinct from the outside but were actually construction, none of it had his fingerprints. She could see it clearly now that she was looking at the bones of it. He'd been the face, deliberately, carefully positioned to be visible and powerful and present, while the actual decisions moved through a single encrypted account that appeared nowhere in his name. Raphael cracked the encryption at 2:17. The name that came up was Serena Caruso. Isabella stared at the screen. She'd met Serena twice. Once at a gallery opening, once at a dinner party where she'd seemed warm and vaguely distracted, and had spent most of the evening talking to Luca about something Isabella hadn't thought to pay attention to. Elegant, composed, the kind of woman who made other women feel slightly underdressed without doing anything visible to cause it. She'd built all of it, years before Luca was even involved. She'd recruited him, positioned him, given him the face of an empire she was running from 3 steps behind, and kept herself so completely off every record that 13 months of undercover work hadn't surfaced her name once. She used him, Raphael said, his voice controlled but with something underneath it that sounded like cold fury mixed with something almost like reluctant respect. The same way he used you. She just did it longer. Isabella looked at the screen for another moment. Then she reached for the notebook. We need everything, she said. Every transaction, every account, every name that connects back to her, all of it in one package. She opened to a clean page. I have legal authorization on 3 of those companies. You said that yourself, which means I can request an audit, which means if we build this right and get it to the right people, it isn't just evidence. She looked up at him. It's airtight. Raphael looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, quiet and complete like a door opening. Not the woman who'd fallen off the cliff, not the woman from the cave or the safe house or day 4 learning to find exits. Someone new, someone who'd been becoming herself this entire time and had just finally arrived. "Give me 4 hours," he said. She was already writing. She heard it before she understood what she was hearing. Brush moving in the tree line behind the safe house, that specific rhythm Raphael had drilled into her, too deliberate, too evenly spaced, nothing like an animal. She'd been cross-legged on the cot still writing when the sound registered and her whole body went quiet before her brain had finished the sentence. "Raphael." She said it flat and low, and he was already at the window, not looking through it, looking at the reflection in the glass, reading the tree line in reverse, his jaw tight. "How many?" she asked. "At least 4, maybe 6. He turned. "We go now." She was already reaching for her shoes, her notebook, the drive. That was everything. That was all there was time to be. They went out the back. Raphael first, then Isabella, moving faster than she had any right to be moving, which she'd learned by now not to question. Adrenaline does something specific to the body, strips away everything that isn't necessary, and right now nothing was necessary except forward. No lights. No sound except their breathing and the soft impact of feet on dirt, and somewhere to the east, invisible in the dark, the crash of the ocean. He had her wrist. Not gripping, guiding, changing direction twice without warning as the tree line shifted around them. She followed without hesitation. She'd stopped needing explanations for his decisions 3 days ago. Then the flashlight beam cutting through the trees from the right, hard and immediate. Raphael pulled her left and down into the drainage ditch, and they were flat against the cold ground, not breathing, the beam sweeping overhead, passing, continuing past, and then nothing. 3 seconds. "Go," he said. They went. The logging road was exactly where it was supposed to be, the gray sedan exactly where he'd left it, unremarkable in every carefully chosen way. They got in, and he drove without headlights. For the first full mile, windows down, listening to the dark before he finally exhaled and turned the lights on. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, or not only. Something more like the aftermath of every nerve in her body firing simultaneously and then finding nothing left to fire at. Then the baby kicked. Hard, sharp, deliberate, the kind of kick that had opinions in it. Isabella made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something she didn't have a word for. "She's mad," she said. "She's got good instincts," Raphael said. "Running when you should run. Takes after her mum." She said it the way you say things you're testing, holding them up to see if they fit. And then she felt it, something settling quietly into place, unhurried, certain. She looked out the window at the dark coastline moving past, the same ocean that had tried to finish her a week ago, massive and indifferent and no longer winning. She meant it, she realized. For the first time since any of this began, she actually meant it. The lighthouse had been decommissioned for years, stone weathered white, the lamp long dead, sitting at the edge of a peninsula that the road reached only through one long narrow lane. Not ideal, Raphael had said, which she was learning meant this is the only option and I've already committed to it. The satellite equipment was in the back room, dusty and functional. He got to work. She opened the drive files on the backup laptop and started organizing, flagging the primary account trails, the transaction chains that connected directly to Serena, building the package with clean, quick movements. She wasn't the woman who'd stood frozen in a study deciding whether to look anymore. She looked. She built. "Connections live," Raphael said. "Audit authorization, I need your signature." She signed without pausing. "Sending." Then the front door opened. Not a knock. Just open. The way doors open when the person on the other side has decided the outcome already. 3 men came through, and Raphael moved before the door had finished swinging. And what happened next took 45 seconds, and she watched all of it, and understood that the man who'd pulled her off the ocean floor was significantly more than he'd described in the safe house. Then Luca's voice behind her. She turned. He was in the doorway she hadn't been watching, and he looked different than she remembered, or she was seeing him differently, which amounted to the same thing. Same suit, same posture, but his eyes were doing something she had never once seen them do in all the years she'd loved him. They were afraid. "Where is the drive?" he said. "Already sent." Something moved across his face fast. "You're lying." "Am I?" She held up the laptop. The confirmation was still on the screen. "Federal contact, everything, Luca. Every wire transfer, every account, every name. Serena's, yours." He took a step toward her. "Don't," she said, quiet, steady. "I'm not on a cliff this time." He stopped. She looked at him, really looked the way you look at something when you're finally seeing it accurately, and she felt the weight she'd been carrying put itself down. Not grief, something cleaner, something that felt almost like being finished. "You should have just let me go," she said. He ran, away from her, out the back, toward the cliff path, and directly into the federal response team already assembled at the perimeter. They had him in cuffs before he cleared the building. Serena lasted 48 hours. She had contingencies for her contingencies, 3 backup identities, a private terminal 2 states over. But the audit had already frozen every account tied to those shell companies, every single one, and her entire financial architecture ran through those accounts. She'd built it that way herself. When they picked her up, she was composed, red coat, that small, cold smile. The agent said she didn't say a word, just smiled like she was already planning the next move. There wasn't one. 3 months later, sunlight everywhere. A small house with yellow curtains and a garden completely out of control because nobody had gotten to it yet, and honestly the garden could wait. A baby girl, 3 weeks old, with strong opinions about everything and her mother's instincts, and a name that wasn't weighted with anything that needed processing. Just a name Isabella loved. Something new, unhaunted. Raphael came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her in the other chair, and they stayed there watching the light move across the overgrown garden, not talking, not needing to. He'd cut his hair slightly, looked less coiled, like he'd put something down too. Isabella put her hand over his on the armrest. He turned his hand over and held hers. That was it. No speech, no declaration. Just 2 people who had survived something unsurvivable, sitting in the light, holding on. The garden stayed wild. The baby slept. The sun kept moving across everything, unhurried, like it had nowhere else to be.